Welcome to the June 29th Special Board of Education meeting. Please take a moment to silence your cell phone and then join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. Thanks all. Jen, can you take roll for us, please?
President Rausch.
Here.
Vice President McFarland.
Here.
Secretary Ringgold is here. Treasurer Lauterbach.
Here.
Member Blasey.
Here.
Member Craig is on their way. Member Horowitz.
Present.
Thanks, Jen. We'll move right into the heart of it with item 2, presentation of the board from the Facility Planning Committee. Thank you all for a lot of the hard work and look forward to today's discussion. And I'll turn it over to Stephen first. But thanks for being here.
Thank you guys for having us. Hopefully we have some good stuff to talk about tonight or this afternoon. It's not as late. Just as a reminder, Stephen Gunther with GMB. Today with me, we also have Brady from GMB, Nandita with GMB. Chris is with us from Three Rivers, and then I'll let the steering team members introduce themselves as well.
Kathy Hughes-Hubble. Amy Sanborn.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi everybody. Thanks for having us back. So this is an image that we've been showing at our community engagement sessions, and this one was one that, as our team started working together, this only felt relevant to visualize the process like this in the classic Tridge form here. And so really the point that we have been hoping is clear throughout this whole process is that, yes, there's the Midland Public Schools efforts here. There's the efforts of you all on the board, the efforts of the admin team, and then the partners, Three Rivers, Clark, GMB, that you all have hired in this effort. But we can't do that alone, and we can't do that in a silo. And so that's where these other two elements come in. You will hear later, and you have heard from the representative steering team, a group of community members who has been so giving of their time and efforts for so many long meetings and the feedback in between, and it has been a pleasure to work with them. But their role being both representing community voices in a smaller room where deeper conversations can happen, and then also reporting back out and sourcing feedback from the community. And that half of the role will continue going forward as well. And then, of course, there's the greater Midland community. So we have been doing our best to make sure that this is not just a small group of people talking, but that this is a community conversation. So that's why you've seen articles, you've seen community-wide surveys, you've seen these community engagement sessions, and that has really been an effort to bring in more voices, make sure that the feedback is really heard and considered along the way. And here we have, our ultimate goal here of this process. How might MPS best steward and phase community resources while taking care of facility needs? So this was the charge put before us, put before the steering team, and then put before the community. This isn't just, obviously we were hired, we were brought on in this process restarted in the wake of a bond proposal, but it was clear that a bond proposal, just as a bond proposal, is not the solution to all the problems, and we can't just start with how are we going to build a bond proposal. We need to start with what are the needs of the facilities and how are we moving forward from here. Again, a lot of this is not new information, but just wanting to make sure we're giving context for this journey we've been on. And so what the steering team plans to present today is the recommendation for how we're approaching this roadmap going forward, not just what's our immediate next step. So I will pass it off to Kathy to give a little bit more context here in what the steering team has been up to.
Yeah, thanks for having us. I think this is a major, important issue to deal with on this at the school level. As I mentioned before, one of the key areas that the committee is bringing to the table is this idea of thought diversity. And we have 29 members from all aspects of the community and all aspects of agreement into how we should proceed. So you have people who voted no for the original proposal, and you have people who are enthusiastically yes, and you have people all the way through the middle. So I think that's important from a steering committee standpoint to make sure that that's understood. So this isn't a yes committee. This committee worked hard and long to bring together the very best recommendation that we possibly could. And I think because of the level of diversity, you had a lot of listening to the community, and you also ended up with something that's very pragmatic and practical and good for our kids. So that would be my 2 cents.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. And when I was here last, I talked over this slide a bit, but it's been revised. So I think, as Kathy pointed out, the purpose of the design of the committee was a variety of backgrounds, a variety of roles in the community, a variety of opinions on past efforts to fund reinvestment into our school infrastructure. So I think the voice and a diverse voices from the community were always part of the design and part of our discussions. And then since I was here last, some of the activity in the darker blue ovals there has been added to our input to come to a final recommendation. So led in large part by Amy, we did a lot of engagement with PTOs and boosters at all levels. There were teacher workshops, specific community engagement sessions where members of the planning committee were represented to help give perspective, and then the community survey and the formal polling, which you'll hear about here in a bit. So I think what was already a group and a process built for listening and for really being representative of the community has become even more so. I would say what I said last time, it's hard to balance all of these considerations and get to a perfect solution. It probably doesn't exist. But I would say our conversations and our time in the committee meetings were certainly educational. I think every one of us learned a ton about what's possible, what the constraints are, some of the challenges. I think it was a respectful discussion. Not to say it wasn't emotional at times, but it was definitely respectful, which I think is a characteristic we need to keep as we move forward and take this conversation more broadly once you kind of align on a path forward. And then, like I said, it was challenging, but it all led us towards consensus. And again, consensus isn't everybody getting what they want, and maybe no one getting exactly what they want. It's not perfection, but I think, and it's also not a final answer, I would say, but I think it gets us towards consensus and a step and a bit of a roadmap, like we showed in the first graphic, towards a longer term plan.
So just as a quick reminder, we had touched on this last month. The steering team met and had their 6th meeting to go through where they started honing their decisions down further. And from there was quite a few steps along the way that then helped influence what the steering team was meeting on in their latest meeting to bring the recommendation to you. So like Paul had mentioned, there was community engagement sessions, PTO and booster groups. There was 2 different staff engagements, one with the teacher leader workshop, where we went through similar activities as we did with the community engagement, but also held an MPS staff virtual engagement session to let them learn about the process, where we're at, and kind of seek their feedback along the way. There was also 2 different metrics of getting a pulse of the community. There was the community-wide survey, which Brady's going to go through tonight, along with the phone polling that was conducted kind of simultaneously. And so all of that information, all of that feedback was then brought to the steering team to help make their final recommendation, which they're going to go through with you guys this afternoon.
Hi, thanks again for having us. So I talked about this a bit in the May meeting when Alicia and I were here. One of the important activities that we did at our meeting kind of midway through the process was to go through a thorough exercise and process, both individually and as a group. Can you go to the next slide, Stephen? And it was really about the head and the heart, which for those of you have probably heard that term before. And we were really looking at what options give us get us closest to those value alignments, those guiding principles that we had. And when we did that as a collective group, what it really led us to was on the higher end of the mill, which was around the 3.6 increase. That's what truly aligned most to the guiding values. However, when we then continued with the exercise and thought about it from the heart standpoint, which is really weighing the data against what would the community truly support. And this was before this meeting took place, before we got into the additional community feedback, which is going to be discussed here in a bit. When we did that, the group, again, this was probably one of our meetings where there was a fair amount of debate and discussion, truly feeling that tug between, again, what we know is right in our head, but in our heart, we knew it was a different answer. And that really got us to more of a 2 to 2.5 mil range in terms of what we felt somewhere there that the community would support going forward. So from there, it was time to get more community feedback and to go out and do more work with more discussions with the survey, with the phone poll as well. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So I'll hand it over to GMB to go through that, because we needed to really get that validation of, are we in the ballpark here with the 2 to 2.5? Are we too high? Are we too low? And so that's what we went to get the additional data.
Yes, so as Amy just mentioned, we went to the full community now to get some both quantitative and qualitative data to really vet these ideas. I think when you're in a room and you're having such good discussion about it, it is easy to stay in that room and not truly know what people are saying outside of it. So we wanted to, we took that last recommendation of what came out of that exercise of that 2 to 2.5 mils, and we wanted to see what the community said and vet that with the broader community, as that was the best solution we had to that point. So just a reminder, the community survey was distributed from May to June. It ended in early June, May 22nd to June 7th. And so GMB, we helped facilitate this survey, but it went through all of the district communication channels that you would expect. So this was email, Facebook, posted on the website, shared with different community organizations and pushed out through their email lists. This was mailed on a postcard to every household within MPS district boundaries. And so, you know, like this was, and I've shared this with the district as well, the admin team. From our standpoint, GMB and the districts we work with, we were really impressed with the participation in this survey. To have almost 1,900 people complete the survey, and it was not a short survey. It was quite robust and detailed, and people took the time to answer thoroughly as they went through. You can see that 85% completion rate is not something I've seen before. Again, your community is just very engaged in this conversation, which is good to see. Another note here is that over 400 people, and I believe it to be more, but this was specifically who scanned the postcard QR code or brought in or came in for a physical copy. There was over 400 people who took it off of a mailed survey. I also have not seen that before. So that was really encouraging to know, okay, this isn't just the folks who happen upon us in normal Facebook scrolling who get our emails. This is people who are receiving a postcard and deciding to engage. And then just a stat there that about 95% of these were, in fact, people who resided within district boundaries. Okay, so you can see we asked some different questions here on just kind of where people are coming from, the connection to MPS. I know this is small. Hopefully you can see it on your screens. But do I have a laser? Oh, guess that won't work. But the top being a parent or a guardian of a current student in the district. And this is to be expected coming from a district facilitated survey. And you'll hear me say that a lot because we need to take into account that because this came from the school district, the people who engage with it will naturally lean more towards those who have been involved in some way in the school district before, who are watching for communication from the school district. However, where we are encouraged by this data is seeing the parents of alumni and then the non-parent community members, who are those next two bars. Those are pretty high in comparison to parents of current students. We've worked in districts where the survey goes out and it's almost all parents, and they have a really hard time hearing from community members that aren't directly connected to the school. So this, again, it's not perfectly statistically accurate, but it gives us confidence in the data. And as we go through the data, we can then highlight and pull out some of this non-parent community member and parents of alumni feedback, as that will be more valuable in terms of voter numbers. When you look at who comes to polls in a school election, typically about 70% of those people are not parents of current students. So the vast majority will likely always be not directly connected to the school. So we want to make sure that any feedback, if we want it to reflect an election and what people will actually say at the ballot box, we need to look at that non-parent community data. And I'll note as well, and this isn't our takeaway slide, which is coming up here too, but the non-parent community member and the parents of alumni, I have grouped together in a lot of this analysis, just so you're aware. You might assume that a parent of an alumni is more connected to the district, has certain feelings one way or another. In actuality, that range can be anyone from a student who just graduated last year all the way to grandkids are now in school too. So with that in mind, that group and the non-parent community member group end up answering very similarly on all questions. So I'll reference those groups together. You can see the geography spread here. Not quite, it's not perfect to where voters live within Midland Public Schools boundaries, but it is fairly accurate there, and it lets us know that people from all over the community did take the survey. And then history in the community too. If you look at this, just good to know that those who are engaging in this survey have been in the community. That's 42% for over 25 years. So that's really significant that you have a lot of community members with great history in this who are taking the survey. The other thing that gave us a lot of confidence in this survey was, again, this voting pattern of the 2025 election. So we asked how people voted in the past election. And again, typically in a school facilitated survey, you would expect to see it skewed positive because people who are taking it are likely parents and they're connected to the schools. However, we see here that those who voted no and those who voted yes, there are more people who took the survey that voted no. So it's not quite the 68% that actually voted no, but it allows us to say, hey, real people who voted took the survey. It's representative in some way of the last vote, so we can, and that helps us break out some of the data we'll talk about as well. You can see that the reasons for voting yes here, facilities need to be updated. I see the need for projects and they will benefit student opportunity, and then maintaining MPS's competitive reputation. Those top two being more significant there, that facilities need to be updated and I see the need for student opportunity. The top reasons for voting no were that the total bond amount was too high, that I didn't agree with some of the proposed projects, and that I have concerns regarding taxes. And just so you all are aware, the way that we've structured this is we'll show the data, and then I'll go through kind of GMB's takeaways and recommendations to you all and what we shared with the steering team as well. So in the open-ended responses, here's what we saw as the explanation for the level of support in the past election. Reasons for voting yes, aging and deteriorating facilities, overcrowding and lack of space, specifically at the elementary level, better opportunities and learning environments for students, that was a little bit more broad, investment in the community's future, again broad, but seeing this more as just a step forward, and then keeping up with other districts, and that competitive reputation came up again in the open-ended responses. Reasons for voting no, very frequently cited were cost and tax burden concerns. A lot of folks on fixed income chimed in and just mentioned the burden that felt the last election. A lack of trust and transparency, I'll break that down a little bit too, but this was a theme that came up in administration, board, broadly the entity of the district in general. Part of this is understanding of operations, and part of it is trust in operations too. So I'll get into that in a little bit too, and I'm happy to answer questions. The bond scope felt too large and unfocused. I don't think that respondents were seeing themes that tied it all together to make sense of the scope last time. And then again, this next piece here, disagreement with specific proposals. So not only were there hot topic projects in the last election, but that this school consolidation, as respondents put it, kept coming up. And I'll note that every single open-ended response in the survey, this was a theme. So I want to make you all aware as the board that even when we're not talking about the topic of high school unification and that idea, it is out there in the community. And even as people look back at the 2025 bond, there's a memory that was a part of it, and that was a reason for voting no, though that wasn't in the proposal. So just to be aware of the way that the community conversation is happening, this kept coming up, and you'll see that throughout the survey too. And then there was a belief that spending doesn't directly improve student outcomes, so why invest in facilities if we can't see that in test scores immediately? So our takeaways as we're looking at this, I just mentioned the demographic, geographic, and voting spread gives confidence in the survey data. So again, it's not perfect, but it gives us some really good insight into the views of residents not directly connected to the schools. Interestingly, geography and then the length of time in the community did not appear to have a significant effect in the responses. So as you think about a voter profile as a community member, you know, those two factors did not seem to have much of an effect. However, the role that they play in the community does. So that's why I've mentioned it's so important to talk about the non-parent community members, including parents of alumni. Throughout the survey, non-parent community members and parents of alumni responded very similarly. I mentioned that. And then just wanting to call out too, so as we did this community survey, there was also a phone polling effort where, did anyone on the board receive the poll? Did anyone in the audience receive the poll? So one? Okay, so, and that, oh, and Anna did over there too. Yeah, so as you can see, it was more of a random sample of voters, and this was just to vet the data, right? So we're doing a district facilitated survey. We want to make sure that there's one that goes through more of a research methodology to get random people, but it was a long survey. I think, Anna, you mentioned it was 18 minutes all the way through. Joe, how long was it? Okay, 15, but still a long time to be on the phone, right? So that was another factor that I wanted to discuss too as we talk about that data. So I'm sharing with you where we got the most data from. This is the community-wide survey, but we wanted to make sure that we're just sharing where the poll stacked up as well. The polling data indicated that the majority of voters still and continue to have a positive perception of both the quality of education that MPS provides and of school facilities. And so we'll get into more of what that means too. But when asked just broadly, you know, how do you rank the job that MPS is doing? How does it stack up against other districts? Those continue to be positive. So once we got through this, before we presented a bond scenario, we wanted to present just focus areas of prioritization for how we address some of the challenges in the facilities. And this text is very small, so we can get you a printed copy if we need. I don't have them with me, but we could get one for you after this. You can see here, I've just called out on the right here, the most supported projects, and so this is combining support and strongly support. Just as you look at this graph here, I believe it's the whitish color on the right is strongly support, the brown is support. Most supported, addressing and replacing aging infrastructure throughout the district, career technical education, equipment and facilities, and then improving safety and security at all schools. The least supported projects being one, we presented an option for addressing elementary overcrowding through moving to the K through 4 elementary model, doing a unified 5-6 building, a unified 7-8 building, and then a unified high school campus. This was in response to that desire of community members we had heard to really look at creative solutions and efficiencies and all that. So that was least supported, followed by addressing elementary overcrowding by building a new elementary to relieve overpopulation. That was not supported either. I mean, there were levels of support there. I don't want to ignore that, but in terms of greatest amount of, or least amount of support, that's where those fell. And then athletics infrastructure as well was not as popular. So our key takeaways there, strong support exists for addressing core infrastructure needs, safety and security, and CTE. And I will say the polling data confirmed those priorities exactly the same, top three. When presented as a possible solution for addressing overcrowding at the elementary level, that reconfiguration and then the unification of the high schools was controversial across all audiences who were surveyed. I phrased it like this because we did ask a specific question later in the survey that we'll get to that focused specifically on the unification of the high school and what that would look like. But in terms of how it was presented in this scenario, that's how it fell. And then among previous no voters, so when we broke those folks out who had voted no last time, these following priorities still received over 50% of support, and that was the same three that we saw up above of addressing and replacing aging infrastructure, career technical education, and improving safety and security. So that's really important to us, especially considering that the second reason for voting no in the last election was that I didn't agree with some of the projects. That tells us that, well, there are projects that no voters can agree on, and if we have a need to address, we can start with those priorities that we have in common. I will say, and I want to be candid with you all, overall the support for improvements across the board is lower than what we see in other districts. So this can be explained by the fact that truly I think you got a better sample size than most districts get. You had a lot of people respond via mail, which is not typical, and that's good because that means that those folks aren't typically interfacing with the schools. So that could be an explanation, but it could also just be that sentiment is lower towards improvements that require a funding proposal. And that could have been an attitude carried into the survey before we even got to present what the scenarios could be. Okay, so here's where we presented the scenarios. So this was, we were vetting what the steering team had said was the culmination of that head in the heart exercise. So 3.6 mils, when we counted up all of the guiding values and how it accomplished all of them, that larger amount, I should say, 3.6 mil increase, that checked all the boxes. When we asked the steering team to consider what would the community actually support, they thought this was more likely, the 2.5 mil increase, which was a $200 million bond proposal. So we asked the question in two ways. We asked it based on the total amount, so that 200 million, and then we asked it based on the millage or tax impact and broke down what 2.5 mils meant to the average homeowner. You can see that of all respondents here, support did cross that 50% threshold, and then it dipped just below it when talking through the lens of millage and tax impact. But I thought this was interesting because that really was not that large of a switch, which would indicate that whether we talk about it in total amount or whether we share it in the millage rate, the day-to-day cost, et cetera, that's not really the deciding factor as people look at this. So again, when we do a district facilitated survey, this is typically where we look to see more of a 60+% support because of usually how district data is skewed a little bit more due to more supporters taking the survey. But here we see right on 50%. And this, as I'll share in the takeaways here, it did drop when we went to the non-community members and the parents of alumni. That went down to between 30-45% for those groups. So that was helpful for us to see here too. When we asked about, what tax amount would you support in terms of a bond proposal, I'm going to share these. Please don't read these as this is written in stone. This is just what people threw out there in the open-ended responses, and we tried to cluster them around some themes. There's a theme around about $100 million as more of a quote-unquote palatable starting point. 1.5 mils being the most commonly acceptable rate mentioned, and then $10 to $20 a month being the common psychological ceiling, which is not so far off from the 1.5 mils, I don't believe. And then there's a clear divide. There was one group in these open-ended responses that were just zero, I'm not giving you more money. I'm phrasing this as it was phrased in the responses to us. And then the other group being moderate targeted investment, this $100 million. Again, this was a rather nebulous number, but just for context. And there was not a lot of support for go big, go get more, we need more. There were some comments that said, our schools need help, I'll support it no matter what, but that was not a common theme throughout the survey. Reasons impacting support. So we asked, just broadly, kind of describe your level of support. High school configuration remains the defining issue. So again, this was not presented as what was happening, but this was brought up as the defining issue for many. So just important to note. Broad agreement that Northeast Middle School needs attention. There are still a few offhand comments that, they don't see the need, they haven't been in that building. And you can see, if you break down and look at the level of support for Northeast as a priority to address, there are still some people that oppose it. But lots of people saying, Northeast Middle School, it just needs attention. It's old, it's aging. Trust and transparency, again, came up. Sometimes specifically, but a lot of times just broadly. Just the idea of trust in the board and trust in administration. Support for facilities. So the idea that facilities need improvements, not translating necessarily to support for a large bond. So we have an issue, but there must be another way than a large bond. And then affordability remaining a significant concern throughout. So our key takeaways here, again, support hovers around 50% for all respondents, but then it drops down to that 35 to 45% among non-parent community members. The polling data did align with this as well for this 2.5 mil scenario. Support varied very little when the data was presented, or the bond was presented by total dollar versus millage. And then, as I mentioned, we did want to test this 3.6 mil idea. Support dropped significantly, and then that opposition number climbed over 50% among non-parent community members. And then polling data indicated a similar level of support, but with a slightly greater level of opposition. There were fewer neutral respondents in the phone poll because in a conversational poll, they were encouraged to, when they said, I'm not quite sure, they were encouraged to, well, if you had to, what would you say? Yeah, so this was really helpful for us. Again, we would expect to see that 60 to 70%. I know our pollsters who conducted the phone poll had said they would expect to see a level greater than 50% in those who strongly support the bond, and they were not seeing that for this scenario. So then we tested the idea of a 1 mil sinking fund. And this was in response to, well, a few different things. The steering team had begun studying the idea of a sinking fund too as an alternate funding mechanism. And this is, as you all are well aware, this has been a conversation in the community as well. Obviously our general fund is limited in what's provided by the state, and we don't want to be taking away from teaching and learning those student staffing, programming, day-to-day operations. So we have the options of sinking funds or bonds. We've pursued bond. What happens if we pursue a sinking fund either in addition to or in place of? So you can see here that the support for the sinking fund climbs significantly, which was just really interesting to see. When we asked about the combined proposals, you can see that it's right around 34%, I believe, that would vote yes on both proposals if there was a sinking fund and a bond. You had 6.3% who would say yes to the bond but no to a sinking fund. You had about 19% who would vote yes on a sinking fund but no on a bond. And then you have close to 17% that would vote no on both proposals. The level of folks who said they needed more information here was significant and valid because these weren't presented with a list of projects with them, right? It was just would you support the idea of a bond and a sinking fund for this amount? So again, that top point being just that, those who said that they needed more information are those who are waiting for some more clarity on what a proposal would be before they can offer support. A sinking fund was generally viewed more favorably than a large bond. Trust and transparency, again, came up. Affordability came up again, shaping opinions in that way. High school consolidation came up again in the sinking fund comments. And then within the sinking fund comments, there's this level of support for investing in schools, but needing to know that the priorities are aligned with however this person would like to see them, who says that their priorities need to be aligned. That was the theme we saw. Our key takeaways here. Support exists for a sinking fund among all groups. 55 to 60% support for a sinking fund exists among those non-parent community members. So that was really encouraging to see in terms of trying to find some viable solutions here that would be supported at the polls. The polling did indicate a lower level of support for a sinking fund. So this indicates that, even though many have requested that the district consider a sinking fund, I know that's come up in conversation and public comment. Here, we're just wondering if many of the folks who were surveyed just don't quite have an understanding for what that is. And I think broadly, someone on the street won't be able to break down school finance and the 3 buckets of funding mechanisms available. So that's fair too. So we were kind of reconciling this in a couple of ways. I think our survey is showing high support for a sinking fund. I think those who are taking the survey through the schools are seeing, okay, schools asking me facilities survey questions. I'm somewhat aware of this conversation. A sinking fund comes up, I'm aware of it. Whereas a person getting called, a cold call, who's just a likely voter, might not have that awareness. The other fact is that with the survey being 15 to 18 minutes long, and they had been presented the 2.5 mil scenario 3 times, then a 2 mil scenario, and then a 1.5 mil scenario, and then they were asked about the sinking fund too, not being clear if that's in addition to the other funds or if that's separate, that may have weighed in here too. So just wanted to share with you that slight discrepancy there, but that in our survey, the support was relatively strong for a sinking fund. Okay, so here's where we asked about the unified high school as its own concept. And this one was presented with a little bit more context, not with any context that said, this is where we're going by any means, but it said, if unifying our high schools allowed us to, and we cited some benefits that some research has showed could be possible with financial efficiencies, with student opportunities, et cetera, would you support the idea of the high schools being unified in the future? So you can see here the support and the opposition. The opposition does outweigh the support, but they're relatively similar. I think where we would like to call attention to is that strongly oppose is a whole lot bigger than the strongly support. So while, when you're asked on the spot to choose, there's about an equal split. There's a whole lot more passion behind the opposition of that idea currently than there would be behind the support of that idea. This 30% or 28% number, though, of I'm open to the idea but need more information to make an informed choice, we found really interesting only from the standpoint that, again, this has been a community conversation. As people chime in the open-ended responses, whether it's to this question or throughout the survey, they're bringing it up. People have strong opinions. And yet there's this silent 28% here that is wondering about it. So again, and it was interesting too that the non-parent community members were actually the largest level of support for this idea. Yeah.
Can we ask questions yet, or should I wait?
Oh, go ahead.
I'm just curious about the amount of, because we're talking a lot about the non-parent community member, like the parent piece from that too, of the need more information.
Yeah, you're asking for a breakdown of who said they need more information?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have that stat right off the top of
curious.
mind, but let me write that down. When we asked about the level of support, kind of explain your level of support, here were how we broke it off. Reasons for support and reasons for opposition. So supporters see a unified high school as a more efficient and sustainable long-term model. More of the view that if our enrollment is going down in the future, if that is where we're trending, and if our budget is tighter and we're trying to sustain programs, if all those things end up playing out, then this would make sense. That's what folks were citing in the survey. Many of the supporters for this idea believe that this could actually increase equity and academic opportunities. Again, that idea that if 2 programs are running and one has to shut down, what does that mean for students? And then some of these supporters believe that concerns about lost opportunities that are shared on the opposition side are overstated, that students wouldn't actually lose that opportunity that has been talked about. However, on the reasons for opposition, that was the top point of opposition, was that reduced student opportunities was the largest concern, followed by this idea that a single high school just feels too big. A lot of folks who would say this cite more that idea that students might fall through the cracks. What if the student population is so big that the students aren't able to get the attention from staff? Loss of school identity and then community tradition and the rivalry was another major theme. And then there was just a group that expressed categorical opposition, not really tied to specific reasons, just against this idea right now. Our key takeaways from here, I just shared this one, this support and opposition about equal, but strongly opposed being greater than strongly support. However, if you do put that purple, I need more information, into the support category, just to see if they're open to this idea in the future and need more information, that's up to 61% who are, you could say, considering the idea, right? So that was just interesting to see. Of those who opposed the idea earlier in the survey, so those who said that they were opposed or strongly opposed to it when we asked about it as a priority in our projects, 28% of that number support it or are open to the idea later in the survey. So, you could read that a couple different ways. We didn't make the survey any longer for good reason, but I would think that indicates that with more information and bringing people along in that process and kind of sharing some of the benefits, if that's where this ends up heading, opinions may change. Open-ended responses touched on student opportunity before they touched on efficiency. So I think where a lot of conversation goes towards financial and operational efficiencies, the concerns lie more in the student opportunity arena. And then polling data confirmed this conflicted community response very closely. Our recommendation is that a unified high school should not be on the November ballot. It is a very divisive issue in your community right now. And while you see folks who are opening up to the idea, if good data and good information is presented to them and good planning, that's just not where we see your community being right now. Okay, so I just wanted to go through, and thanks for letting me blab a little bit. You can tell I like the survey data stuff, so happy to answer any questions here too. But our overall insights from this were that, again, the survey represented a reasonably accurate sample of the community that gave us context in it. There was broad support for addressing that aging infrastructure, safety and security, and then improving career technical education, even among those former no voters. But there's a tension in this facility's perception. So that desire for infrastructural improvement is expressed and the need is noticed, but the majority of voters still have a general positive perception of MPS facilities. So the poll asked, what is your perception of facilities, right? And people answered they have a good perception. And then you ask them, how it should be improved, and people have opinions for how it can be improved too. So people see a need, but maybe they don't see it as dire or urgent, you could say. So, and there's a gap in awareness of, we see a need, but then how do we fund and address this? And actually someone in the steering team brought up a good point that with the history of philanthropy in this community, there might be a wide felt feeling that a larger organization will come in and support, and maybe not the same level of where other districts across the state have been used to bond proposal as a regular funding mechanism for the school. Folks here are used to other funding coming in and more opposed to taxation. While the poll showed slightly lower support for a sinking fund, the survey does show that higher support for the sinking fund, higher support for sinking fund than a bond among all community members. And that support for a bond does exist still. It's not something that just disappeared, but at that 2.5 mil level, at least it was heavily concentrated in parents and staff. Our recommendation that November proposal should not include a unified high school. It's growing incrementally, that idea, that support of it, but feelings are still very mixed among community members. And I think most simply put, I would say it's not something that folks can rally around right now as we look for a plan that will unify the community and move forward. Results showed that respondents have a greater concern about infrastructural challenges over future-focused educational spaces. So I don't think there's a huge surprise there, but that was confirmed in our data. Tax and financial concerns are significant. Monthly budgets for people on fixed incomes came up repeatedly in the survey. Non-parent community members. Okay, so this one is regarding the communication, and I wanted to give this as context for the next two. So we asked folks where they received their information, and then I broke it out by non-parent community members. And these are the top places where people receive their information about the district. Social media, local news, and then word of mouth through friends and family. And you could argue that 1 in 3 end up being the same in many ways, right? And so through that, there was a lot of comments in the survey that were just not correct. They were referencing school funding in ways that legally it wouldn't even be possible. In many ways, I think people saying past bonds have funded staffing, which we know is not the case and is audited and is not the case. Staffing and admin costs that people were saying, the sentiment was common that use money from your administration budget towards your facilities. Again, just not understanding where these buckets of funding come from and the interplay and programming versus operations versus facility improvements. And so I would say that understanding was strong. And then also there's just this notable trust gap in both the board and administration right now. And this was, we try to break this down and see kind of where is this coming from. Truthfully, I will tell you that you're not alone in this. This is felt across the state and I think the country right now. I think there is a mix of, there's a lot of environmental factors that are causing frustration, and that frustration is a lot of times shared with the local unit of public service of the public institution, and so a lot of times that does come out in schools. So I was trying to get you some feedback that would actually be helpful and actionable for you all here too. So the past facility decisions, specifically the closure of the elementary school and then the 2025 proposal, were probably the most widely cited reasons for a lack of trust in administration and the board, and then a perceived lack of responsiveness to input. And this was interesting, as people said this, I think everyone has their own perception, right? Sometimes, and we would use this going forward, we debated whether a survey was worth doing, right? Because sometimes a survey can feel like you're being asked the same questions, like especially if someone was surveyed for the strategic planning process, et cetera, right? Which is not the case, because as you can see, we have pulled through this data, we shared with the steering team, we did a lot of work with this. But just caution in the future too on as we go for more input and community engagement, just being really clear with how it's shaping the process going forward. And if you don't hear that from us today of how it's shaped our process, please share that feedback with us, and we want to make sure that you hear that this has been instrumental to our process. But then I would also encourage you all, with any communications going forward, just share how this has been formed and shaped by the community as you do that too. So that was a lot. Can I answer any questions for you?
I would just, for starters, I think this is really helpful. I think the survey data in particular does a lot to just focus us in on what are the priorities, what are the 2 or 3 priorities, and I think that that's been very helpful. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that's taken time. I mean, 1,900 respondents plus people that spent 15 minutes on the phone with us. It's a lot of time to dedicate and show care for the future of MPS. So a lot to process, but a lot of good insights as well.
I have a couple of questions. On the community and polling data, you said that 94.9% reside within the MPS district boundaries. I just want to be clear that those are individuals that are eligible to vote on MPS bonds and sinking funds. So we're not polling people that can't vote in our election.
The phone poll definitely did go to likely voters. That stat I shared was from our survey, and that was a breakdown of folks who said whether they live in the community or not. So there is a little bit, there was about 60 students who took the survey, and I don't think all those students were of age. There's a slight discrepancy in there. But if you want to drill down on that, that would be in the voting, or in the history in the community as well. And then the voting patterns that I choose not to answer this question / I did not vote starts to encapsulate some of those folks who either, because there's actually a notable amount of people who answered the question and just said like, I don't have status to vote in this country, or I'm not old enough yet, so.
Okay, and that would have gone into the I did not vote category?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you for clarifying
Yep.
that. One more question. On the slide that indicated why folks, the reasons for voting yes or no, it appears that they were able to select more than one response. Is that correct? Or would they limit?
In the slide here,
Oh, it's right here. Sorry.
they were asked to select up to 3, I believe.
Oh, okay, so there were additional reasons, and these were the top 3.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, and I actually forgot to thank you for bringing that up. In the reasons for voting yes, the least compelling reason for voting yes was that schools need bond proposals for school funding. So I shared that with the steering team as a group that has been working really hard to understand school funding and all that, and being compelled by, schools are limited in what is available to you all to make significant improvements. That ends up being a compelling reason for those who dig deep and have learned that. But for those who aren't aware of that, that's not a reason to show up at the polls necessarily.
It was the top 3.
Oh, great. Yes, it was pick the top 3. Thank you.
I just have one question about the data. So when you talked about you typically see 60 to 70% support, do you have any data to tie that to how, if there's a survey done, how a bond might do in that same area where the survey was done?
Like you're saying vetting once the bond has passed or not passed, if the survey aligned with it?
Correct.
I don't have that data off the top of my head. I think that's a valuable question for sure, though. I think a lot of times I would say that those districts that show that level of support have a history of support of bond proposals as well. And so that passage rate is not, the passage rate is higher for their bond proposals too. But I don't want to speak to a data point that I don't necessarily have, so I'll look into that.
Kind of as a follow-up to that question as well, one of the things that we started this whole conversation with was if there wasn't enough support for anything at any point, are you seeing that there is a threshold of support, or that we do not have enough community support at this point?
I don't want to scoop from the steering team's
Okay, all right.
recommendation, but I would say you are facing a significant facilities need that we need to continue pursuing some sort of solution for, right? In our minds, yes, there's a threshold of support here, but any communication on that needs to be very consistent and very clear about that need. And it needs to speak directly, both in the scope of the proposal and then within the communication around the proposal, speak directly to those top priorities of the community of aging infrastructure, career technical education, and safety and security. I'm sensing that was probably a good segue, Jen, into the next part here too. So I'll pass it off and happy to answer any other survey questions as they come up.
Can I, before we move on, I thought of something while you were asking your question. So in terms of the survey and the polling, we saw numbers on 2.5 mils, 2.0 mils, and then some description about 3.6, but then just 1.0 for sinking fund. Were there other levels of sinking fund that were?
We didn't, and that we just didn't want to oversaturate. And I think too, as we were asking those questions, without a specific level of scope associated, people were starting to feel exhausted by, I don't know if I can support it. I haven't found out what's in it yet, too. So, and Jen, I would point that back to your question there too. Like, this level of support is just on the broad idea of a fund. If a proposal is presented with all those things in it, what does that do to? Yeah. So.
All right, thanks, Brady. So it was a lot to take in, and that was what the steering team sat through as well to help influence their decisions. So as we go back to this roadmap, I think if we pause a second to go back where we started, right? There was facilities assessment completed. There was a walkthrough of every building with every single administrator to understand educational programmatic needs. There was educational assessment that was completed. I think the steering team saw about 8 or 9 different ways that you could think about restructuring the district to get enough kids to make your utilizations figure out. I think there was 5 or 6 different bond scenarios that they looked at, all of that culminating together to kind of build these 2 different roadmaps that the steering team studied in their last session. And these roadmaps also take into consideration 3 different community engagement sessions, workshops with the teachers, the polling, and the survey. All of that influenced building these 2 roadmaps that they studied. So the roadmap on the left looks at November of 2026 and says that starting point of that roadmap is both a bond and a sinking fund, both of those on the ballot together. In that example of a roadmap, 2035 becomes the first point where the district paying off their previous bond and in conjunction with this would have a 0 mil increase to maintain your millage rate moving forward. And then 2036 would be a sinking fund renewal on a 10-year sinking fund. To note in that proposal, it's 2032 before a large scale, $140 million project is actually completed to get bond funding, design, bidding, construction, all of that. The next option was to look at just pursuing a sinking fund in November of 2026. In that scenario, using November of 2028 to go for a bond, 2035 is still that 0 mil bond increase. 2036 is a renewal of a sinking fund. As a reminder, that pushing the bond 2 years is also pushing the completion of a large scale project into 2034. So we talked with the steering team, and we talked about this the last time that we were here, but just as a reminder, legally bonds and sinking funds can be spent on different things. And, it's funny and very particular when you get to the details, but as an example, if we look at any of these doors, if my hinge is squeaky and I just need to put some WD-40 on it, that's considered maintenance. I can't spend sinking fund and I can't spend bond dollars to do that. If I go to the hinge and I just replace the hinge, I can spend my sinking fund, but I can't spend my bond dollars because that's now considered a repair. If I completely replace the door and the frame and all of the hinges together, now I'm into renovation category, of which I can use either a sinking fund or a bond to do it. So those 3 categories are usually where some of the most ambiguity is in how you can spend your money. So Maintenance just keeps something working. Repair is to fix just the particular component that's broken, and then renovation is to kind of improve or modernize. One of the things to keep in mind, though, is that while renovation, captures modernization of classroom spaces, you cannot spend sinking fund dollars on classroom furniture. It has to come out of bond funding. When we look at, how this roadmap looks when we're talking specifically about a bond, we presented this last month, but as a reminder, working with PFM on updated taxable values, interest rates, all of that, while still maintaining a conservative approach to the projections. If a 2 mil bond were to be pursued in November of 2026, it would generate $190 million. If a 2.5 mil bond were pursued in November of 2026, it'd be $229 million. Potential project, we've talked about $140 million project as an example. If we hold that same bond vote and use the projections to put it into a 2028 vote, your 2 mil bond is now a $199 million bond. Your 2.5 mil bond is a $240 million bond. But with the escalation of the construction costs and all of that, your $140 million project very likely could be a $148 million project. Also looked in that same chart there, kind of that 2035 point, and when your 0 mil increase could occur, whether it's 2026 or 2028, and the different amount that can be generated in each of those times. And then as a reminder of kind of what the sinking fund can do, 1 mil sinking fund for this district is a yearly about $3.1 million. 2 mil sinking fund is 6.2. Have put in there a couple of the middle ground there. Of 1.5 mil is about 4.6, and a 1.75 mil is $5.4 million. I think what the sinking fund, and we'll let the steering team kind of talk about this some more, is you're still able to address some of those top priorities that the community expressed. Infrastructure needs, CTE, safety and security. You're still able to address those while also having additional considerations, because there are still needs in categories of buses or teacher instructional technology. So I'm going to pass this over then to the steering team and let them kind of talk to you guys on how they weighed these options side by side, and let them kind of talk how their thought process and how they came to consensus.
I think you can see a lot of thought process and a lot of data and statistics came into the final decision. I think the idea of being practical and pragmatic this year is really key to moving forward, and having the ability to communicate with the community before you went for a bond so you could explain, the thought process a little bit more. I don't think you have time to do that. So in November of 26, recommending going into the sinking fund is probably the best way to go, and especially with the messaging on the repairs and infrastructure, the CTE, and the safety and security. To me, as a grandmother, that's one of my key topics. So I thought the messaging was very clear and purposeful and simplified, and very much in line with things that would allow transparency and help to build trust over the next 2 years. I think it meets a lot of those criteria that you're looking for. And at the end of the day, most likely to be approved by the voting public. So that was kind of the thought process that I had.
The one thing that I wanted to stress and talk about, because we had a lot of conversation about this when I was here in May, which is what stands out to me in support of just going with the sinking fund now is it opens up that opportunity for another 18 to 24 months conversation to continue to talk to the community, educate the community. To Kathy's point, it just gives us more time, quite frankly, to really continue to engage. We saw in the survey data that, we have that group of people that are kind of like, I need more information to really decide. So that gives us a chance to lean in with that group and give them more of that information. We can, continue the conversation about a unified high school if that's a conversation we want to continue to have. But I just think this, gives us that additional time to really have that meaningful discussion. And then the last thing I wanted to add is, being part of this last year and into this year, I think this really shows that we're listening. We've really taken into consideration what we've been hearing from the community, that what they're feeling, where they see that we can take a step forward together, which I believe is the most important thing. We need to take a step forward. We need to get a win on the board. And I think this gives us the ability to do that. And that, I believe, is what is really important for this community at this time. And we also, just recently in a couple weeks, another few factors that came into play. We talked about it at our most recent meeting, which is, the city is likely coming forward with a millage request as well. And then, as we've all seen and heard, Dow did a reduction recently. And so that is obviously hurting folks in our community as well. So we just really feel like this is something we can get folks to rally around, and bigger, longer term conversations, then we can dive into that for the next couple years and continue to make progress in those conversations together.
I'll just add a couple of quick comments. One, I think, as Amy was saying, I think as we talk about this, we need to stress and have people understand that this isn't solve all the issues that we've been talking about, because some people will be disappointed that, hey, we're hearing about some significant issues. If we have a sinking fund that generates $4.5 million or maybe $5 million a year, how is that solving problems? And it will, but it doesn't reset or solve the long-term structural problems. So I think people, as we talk about it, would need to understand that this is a step, but there needs to be another step and commitment coming behind it at some point. Second, I think, the risks of waiting. Obviously, the risk of asking or going too boldly now is that it's another defeat and we're nowhere again. There are risks of waiting if you assume that Northeast is the biggest facility need, and if you assume that those graphics of some new building represent a solution to that. It's a 2-year difference, so it's not too dramatic. I do think, though, Northeast, from all that we understand, has some pretty significant risk of just near-term failure, and there's probably some sinking fund dollars that would need to help bridge the Northeast gap to whenever that can get solved. So that's part of the consideration here. I think my third point is, and it was mentioned a bit by Brady, I think this is a great example of listening to the community, trying to understand where our community is now, asking for something on the ballot that's got a reasonable chance of support. But I don't think any of us can assume that or take that support for granted. This still needs a lot of communication, a lot of effort between now and November to get this over the finish line and earn the community's support, and then set up the time, for a longer term consensus building kind of conversation. And I think if we can somehow mimic over a few years what our 30-person steering team kind of went through, in a larger community scale, I think that can help kind of build some consensus to some next step investment in 2028.
So what all the time spent together, all of the education that we did, all the listening, all the community outreach, the survey, we ultimately came to the recommendation of the sinking fund and putting that on the ballot in November. Our recommended millage rate span was 1.5 to 1.75. We wanted to leave a little room for you guys to weigh in on your decision. So we just gave a little range there, which ultimately, from a capital investment perspective, that's 4.6 to 5.4 million per year. So again, I just want to stress that selecting that range, and Kathy and Paul can comment as well, that was not an easy decision either. We definitely had folks that were leaning more towards, lower than 1.5, maybe even going up a little bit higher for various reasons. A lot that we've talked about is, what would people really rally behind in terms of affordability and those types of things, but not being too low that we can't do some of the things that we need to do to fill the gap until we can get to a bigger bond discussion down the road. So we ultimately landed at the 1.5 to 1.75 range. I don't know if you guys want to.
And I think it was on a previous slide, it's not right here, but I think stressing that the priorities for investment of sinking fund dollars would be building infrastructure, career and technical education investments, and safety and security. There will be other things that come up, and part of the sinking fund is addressing the unplanned and things that the district needs to support based on things that would happen over the term of the fund dollars. But those three priorities are clearly the priorities of the group.
And so just a couple planning timeline here as we move forward. We have the board meeting today highlighted with the red star. There will be a community engagement session on July 15th to share where the steering team's recommendation and how that came together, with the board meeting on July 20th to finalize, what this scope is going to be, and a board meeting August 5th to approve the ballot language so that it can get to the county in time. We'll open it up to Q&A, but I do just want to take a moment to really thank the steering team. They did a fantastic job, and they all took their role seriously in considering all of the things, right? Like, it's really hard to go into a room and want all of the things that you want, but there's so many other factors at play that help guide the decision and get you to a point. So they really did a fantastic job, and I highly recommend, if you guys see any of them in the community, to really thank them for the service that they did, because they spent a lot of time together and studying and really wrestling with some of these decisions. So with that, open it up to some Q&A.
I have just one quick question. Amy, Kathy, and Paul, thank you so much, and thank you to the rest of the steering team. What a tremendous undertaking and effort you guys have put into this, and the amount of data was, frankly, I think, overwhelming to keep track of it all as we were going through slide after slide after slide. My question is, assuming the board follows the recommendation and we land somewhere in the 1.5 to 1.75 mil range, was there any thought given to what might be an acceptable millage rate for a bond in 2028? Did anybody talk about that, or, because that would be in addition to?
It would be in addition to, and that certainly informed our recommendation on a sinking fund mill, because I think it should be clear that there is high likelihood that there will be a bond request coming at some point after this. And that would be in addition to during the term of the sinking fund. So we didn't get into a detail on that, but I would think it would be in the range of some of the bond proposals that we were, testing in some of the public surveying that went on. So I think the high end was 2.5, or I think there was a more ambitious up over 3. So in that neighborhood, I think.
One of the key takeaways going through the different types of committees and meeting with the PTO, no matter what that number is, the next 2 years need to be filled with communication, because the understanding of needing the bond has to be crystal clear, and you need those 2 years to go. It might land 2.5, it might land 1.5. You're going to have to check the availability and the feasibility that people think, but the biggest thing is that communication, because people don't really have, even though you think they've done a ton of communications what we found going to PTO clubs and places is just they don't understand. And because they don't understand, no gets the first vote. So I think spending a little money in marketing and understanding that is going to be a key to whatever dollar figure is paid.
And I think that's part of the conversation over the next, say it's 2 years, it might be longer, but this idea, and I raised it last time about, well, we can talk about optimizing footprint, and we can talk about millage rate, and we can talk about quality of buildings and programming. And there's some place where those all come together. And if the community really loves the footprint and if any changes, and I'm not even talking about unified high school or not, but any changes to the footprint are kind of off the table for the community, then the question is, well, how much are we willing to pay for that? So I think the rate is tied to those other conversations that I think take more time to have the conversation, build towards some consensus.
Thank you.
I have a couple of questions, and thank you all for your time. I really appreciate it. I will say that I may seem a little frustrated. It has nothing to do with any of you. Okay. In your discussions, was there discussion about, at least it's my perception, that if we go for a sinking fund or a bond, that the community will want to see, I would say, notable improvements, right? And $3.1 million, I guess I have to ask the Three Rivers and the GMB folks, but I don't even think that's buying us a new roof on Northeast. So I'm struggling because I don't think that we're going to be able to show the community what they want. And so I'm fearful that we'll just get a no next time, regardless of what we go for, because we couldn't show them big improvements from 3.1 million or 5 million.
That was brought up in the communication. The bigger thing is going to be the consistency of what you say you're going to do and do it. So if you say you're going to put half a roof on Northeast, there better be pictures. So baby steps and making sure that all of those top priorities, we're going to do infrastructure, we're going to do a little CTE, we're going to do a little safety and security. This is what it looks like, and we did it, and we're going forward. I think that building over the next couple years is as important as doing something big. I think it's really part of the whole idea of how to get to the point where you can say, we really need to do something big, and we've earned your trust. Here's what we've done. So that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, it's baby steps. I mean, we all want to get there fast, but I think it's kind of growing with the community and those baby steps. And it gets back to as we move forward with the communications, just spending a lot of time. I mean, I love what Paul said about, is there a way to replicate the experience that we had with the broader community, especially around how school funding works, because how much things cost. I just don't think people realize what it costs to put a roof on a building and how school funding works. It was shared earlier, but someone on our steering committee, for right or for wrong, I've only lived in Midland since 2010, so I can't speak to before that, but there is a phenomenon in this community that a certain company or certain foundations will just step in and fix it. And whether that's true or not, that is a true phenomenon in this community.
So do you believe that people want to learn enough about the schools to be educated enough to vote yes the next time around? Because I'm really troubled by the fact that people thought the unified high school was on the last bond and that our facilities are doing just fine. We must have completely failed in our communication, and I'm worried that people don't really want to learn enough that we won't be able to get through to them for next time around.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid concern. I think you got to really lean into the groups that do. and really expand their knowledge and understanding, and hope that, I know hope is not a strategy, but that they will engage with their relatives and other folks in the community and spread that educational knowledge, but really leaning into that 80%. And you're typically just not going to satisfy that 20%.
I think I'd add to that too is a point of optimism for you all. We've seen some really just great community conversations happen in this process. And I think of, there was one gentleman who came to a couple of the steering team meetings, and the first meeting he asked us if we'd ever heard of maintenance, and we should do that. And by meeting 3, his recommendation was that we replaced every building. And truly, and I know that's not every person, but I just want to share that as a point of strong education and bringing people in and conversing with them. And we saw that too in our community engagement session. We had people come who very openly opposed the last bond, and they engaged with us really authentically. And we've heard productive suggestions from them on how we move forward and how we rally the troops. So I just want to color that a little bit with. There is a pulse of understanding, but I think to the steering team's recommendation, it takes time and it's a lot of energy.
I'm curious if the steering team had any conversation about utilizing those sinking fund dollars to do improvements at Northeast.
Not specifically, other than invest in aging infrastructure. I think the Northeast question is going to be really hard, right? Because you have a critical, acute need.
Right.
You have a desire, or we all have a desire to probably make a full replacement at some point. So you don't want to put valuable dollars with lots of other needs into a building that might have a 2032 or 2034 exit date, but it's got to function for another, even in our best case scenario, if you did decide to pivot from this recommendation and put a bond on, and with the intention of Northeast, and then that passes, we're still talking about, 7 years out or 6 years out, I guess it was. So we didn't talk specifically, but I have to imagine Northeast is going to need a share of those sinking fund dollars. But that's really a administration question.
I know as a board member, it would be my preference to not put any more money. Like if we're getting $3 million from our community and knowing that building is coming offline, and then make other decisions about, those kiddos might have to go someplace else, and what that looks like. And that's a really, really hard call, because then you're changing the footprint without having dollars. If that building comes to end of life before 2034 or 2032 even. So, yeah.
We did talk somewhat at length about some of the optimization questions. Like, that's not really a ballot question. The dollars are the ballot question.
Correct.
The optimization question is an administration and board question. And that may be planned or unplanned. So the optimization question may be forced upon you and forced upon the community in a disruptive way versus a thoughtful, planned way. And that's obviously, you'd rather have the latter, but there's risk there. So
share a couple thoughts. I think to address some of Ann and Jen, your comments, I think it's imperative that we don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Correct.
And, I was reflecting on, 12 years ago, almost to the day, my wife and I bought our grandparents' house. It was built in 1964. It had orange shag carpet. It had pink toilets. And we looked at each other and said, what the hell did we just get into, right? But slowly, over 12 years of making small investments and doing a lot of the work ourselves, we've gotten to a place where we really enjoy our house, right? And I don't really see this as any different. It's what Midland Public Schools represents is the students and teachers that walk our hallways every day, and we have to we have a really good thing going, as was evident in the survey response. We have to embrace that and keep putting one foot in front of each of ourselves. And I really appreciate all the work that you've done. I don't have anything that I would change in your recommendation. I think you've really worked through the most prudent path forward as possible. And when it comes to a lot of the survey results and some of kind of showing our scars, I guess, it's an opportunity for us to embrace that as a board and really realize that change is hard. Change is especially hard in Midland, I think. If you think back over the last 5 to 10 years, everything that this community has tried to change, we've stopped. The farmers market only moved because of the pandemic. The 2 one-ways aren't changing, right? Go down the list of things that we've tried to change as a community over the last 5 to 10 years, and they've all been no, right? Because people don't like change. But I think this is an opportunity to show that we can really embrace what's hard over the next 2.5 years. And I think, Paul, you've really said it well, that if we want to keep the physical plant that we have to make either a decision to fund the physical plant that we have, or we have to start cutting programs and optimize our operational budget. And I don't know what the answer to that is, but over the next 2 years and kind of recreating this process for the community is one way to do it. But we have to figure out how to communicate. I think, Jen, to your question on like, how do you justify putting any money into Northeast right now is a difficult one, but I think if we sit down with the construction experts, we can figure out innovative ways to extend building life and like ask questions in a different way that says, how do I get the building to last 5 years or 10 years, but not 20? I don't know if there's answers to those questions, but we can figure it out and really take the next 2 years to rebuild trust, rebuild transparency, and really show our community how schools are funded, recreate that experience that you've had and move forward. So again, I don't have anything to change on your recommendation. I think it's the most prudent thing that we can do at the moment that really achieves the outcomes that you set out to do, which is to be the best stewards of resources, of the taxpayer resources, and taking care of our facilities. So, thanks. The one question that I would ask, I think this is for Stephen. If it's not for you, you can delegate appropriately. I think before I would be in favor of voting on something in July, I would like to see some specificity around how we decide 1.5, 1.75, and how do we really address truly what is a need, no wants, and how do we best prioritize to drive student outcomes as we go forward?
Yes. So our next step, actually starting tomorrow, is to meet with Mike and Anna to start reviewing. When we did that facility assessment, as a reminder, blinders on to everything, right? Like not having any experience as to what the buildings were, how they got there, any of that, and putting that whole facility assessment with that lens on. Now it's taking and bridging the gap of working with the district to identify, what are things that were planned as part of your operations in the next 3 years. How does that align with the facility assessment? Does that need to, change based on what the facility assessment is showing there? And kind of bringing those two things together to help plan at least these next 1 to 3 years and how that works and align it with the dollars.
No decisions today. It's all feedback. Do other board members have questions, comments, concerns for what you want to see going forward?
I will just say, I also thank you for asking for that. I think that's going to be really important for us and also for the community, right? You know, a few months ago, we're like, we have $500 million of things that we need to fix in the next 10 years. And now we're looking at maybe, you know, 3 to 4 million, maybe 5 million a year to be able to do that scope. And so that I don't envy y'all that work. So thank you in advance.
I actually would like to see possibly 2 different paths forward. I'd like to see one that includes Northeast and one that it does not include Northeast, and how our priorities might change.
You're speaking specifically for the sinking fund. Got it. Brad, Mackie, anything else? All right. If there's no other questions, we'll let these guys get back to enjoying their summer. And again, this has been said many times, but I really appreciate everybody's time and thoughtful insights. It's been greatly appreciated. Thanks. All right. The item number 3 on the agenda tonight were requests to address the board. I had a Megan Y. I'm not sure. Sorry, what's the last name? Yazek. Coming up. Welcome, Megan.
Hello. Yeah, I just would like to offer a perspective on some of the key themes we've heard tonight. And just for quick context, I've lived in Midland for more than 30 years, but I didn't grow up here. So I don't have any nostalgia about our schools, and my daughter will graduate Dow High before any of this comes to pass. So really, I'm here tonight because I want Midland to be my forever home. And I see the connection between quality schools and quality of life, and I believe that it benefits all voters and not just parents to invest in our schools, because it helps us, attract and retain quality workers for our businesses and sustain our population and our tax revenue for the services and the amenities we want. And so, right or wrong, it has been unfortunately framed in the community that to make that investment, to approve those dollars, we're either locking in a specific brick and mortar solution, or worse, that we're giving carte blanche to maybe not even this board, but some board of the future to choose that brick and mortar solution. And so whether that's accurate or not, it is a barrier to approval, and it will need to be addressed. And secondly, I think that this fear that consolidation of schools would result in loss of opportunities keeps getting dismissed as kind of inaccurate or emotional or imaginary, but it's real and it matters. When asked to choose between new buildings and more opportunities for our children, our community chooses more opportunities every time. So if we're serious about combining schools, and maybe we are and maybe we aren't, but we will have to be able to assure the public we can do that without cutting opportunities, and we'll have to concretely demonstrate that, not just say that. We're talking about 2 high schools that are already individually large. They are twice the median enrollment of Michigan schools, and there are only 5 schools in all of Michigan that are as big as Dow and Midland combined. And they're already sharing resources. They share a stadium, they share a theater, they share a trades program. So even though we hear about declining enrollment, unless you're talking about enrollment that's going to be less than 900 anytime soon, it will almost assuredly mean fewer spots on varsity sports teams and in student government and marching band and school plays, et cetera. So I think we'll have to demonstrate why that wouldn't be the case if that's not the case. And we hear that maybe academic opportunities will improve, but 10 years from now, my daughter will not know or care how to factor a quadratic equation, or diagram a sentence, or conjugate a Spanish verb. She may not even remember the names of any of the kids she sat next to in English, but she will never forget what it felt like to tap dance on the rooftops in her school musical, or watch her cross-country team hoist a regional championship cup or medal at DECA States. And she'll never forget cheering for her Midland High friends in music and sports either, because for her, there's no rivalry. Twice the schools means twice the opportunities to watch her friends shine. Thank you. Sorry.
Thanks, Megan. Thank you. Megan was the only one that signed up ahead of time. Does anybody else want to address the board? Welcome, Joe.
Hello. Obviously off the cuff, since I didn't know what they were going to say, and I didn't bring my binoculars, so if you could put the slides up on the website with the agenda, it'd be nice to be able to read it all. It would be also nice to get the survey raw data to be able to take a look at some of that data, which we have done in the past, and it would be nice to be able to see it this time as well. Files, not PDF, so we can do keyword searches, if that's possible. You've heard the trust argument or presentation, et cetera. Your sinking fund is your first real opportunity to address that. Sinking fund with reporting. What did you do? Published, communicated on a regular basis. Where did the money go? If people think it goes into a black hole, they're not going to give you more money the next time. Lastly, communications. You now have 25 volunteers, or what I would consider unpaid agents of MPS, who are now going to be out there in social media doing whatever inside information you give them. I would like to know, one, do they have a code of conduct? Do they understand what they shouldn't do while representing you? We were attacked last time by a variety of anonymous people and all sorts of other stuff. Don't want to go through that again. Did they sign an NDA? Just be good to know. And also, who are the 25 people? Just so we understand if they are a citizen or an interested party. So that's all I have for now until I have a chance to review the slides. But I'm not surprised we ended up at a sinking fund, and you can actually use it to your advantage to say, we bought a bus and we didn't spend any interest getting it this time, like a bond.
Anybody else like to address the board? Welcome.
Hello, Renita Bonadies. I was just wanting to reiterate the transparency issue that we've addressed multiple times during public comment. One that I mentioned last month. So we were talking about the need to communicate and help educate the public. So last bond, we were constantly told the millage rate was going to feel like, and there was a 0.65 removed mills that was kind of wrapped in because the 2015 bond is dropping. Well, last year, after the bond failed, the public did not get to see the 0.65 mills that were supposed to drop. Instead, they only got 0.45 of that. This year, at last month's meeting, again, the mills were supposed to drop based on what needed to be paid. 0.31 was supposed to be the drop. Instead, there was no drop. Instead, the board voted to keep it at 2.5 instead of the 2.19. So that again, that took $900,000 out of the pockets of this community at a time you're getting ready to go to the ballot and ask them for more mills. Didn't really make sense to me to do that. Another thing, I guess I'm looking at the $549 million that the public was told was a need during the next 10 years. And I'm looking at the numbers that have been presented, even if the bond gets pushed out 2 years. In the next 20 years, essentially on bonds, you're going to only generate about $261 million. That doesn't begin to cover $549 million at today's price. So I'm trying to figure out what exactly was that $549 million. Was that to create almost brand new buildings? Was it going through and assessing basic needs to keep a building functional for an educational facility? I mean, our house, if I had somebody go through and go, just give me what it would make it to make it great, they might go, oh, well, you need $100,000. And I go, okay, but I can probably live in that house for a whole lot less in upgrades. So that $549 million seems to be a disconnect because the numbers presented are not even beginning to cover that in the next 10 years or even the next 20. So what is the real need that we're presenting to the community versus do we want all new roofs, all new lights, all new, not roofs are not the issue, sorry, ceilings, floor tiles, all new furniture. Does all of that have to be done in order for us to have a facility that will educate students in this community? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Sure. Welcome.
Thanks, all of you guys, for all the work that you did. I'm Suzanne Reel, and I just wanted to offer a little bit of hope for us. And as I was listening to your questions, and we're talking about Northeast, if you actually look at the facility assessment, go to slide 13, go to the total year 1 through 3 priorities. There's virtually zero roof system budget need in years 1 through 3. So that is not our highest priority. Maybe we need some patchwork or whatever. And if you look at the Northeast data and you kind of filter out some things that are like, well, that's really big, we're never gonna do that, right? You get down to fire safety and maybe some patchwork. And so it's not, I don't think it has to be a huge investment that we're looking at for Northeast. I actually think if we used a set of parameters, all of our answers are right here in the data that has been collected. Probably people, Chris from Three Rivers and, the engineers have to actually look at it. But I actually think there's a lot we can accomplish with the sinking fund proposed, so.
Thanks, Suzanne. Anybody else?
Hi, Bill Domina. I just want to say I found this really very interesting meeting, and I found it very effective. I really liked the data analysis, Brady. It was very helpful. As far as communication, I mean, a lot of people have already said some of the things I was thinking, but I would keep it very basic. I mean, when I saw some of the glitzy, cutesy presentations, that kind of turned me off, like how much coffee a day cost and that stuff. I think you need to base it down to the very basics, like for the sinking fund. Say, we're going to buy so many buses, we're going to buy so many Chromebooks. Hopefully you guys will reduce that dramatically again, but there's a lot of that stuff that just say what it is, and that's what it's going to be. And then go into the high school. I mean, Ann convinced me that that was the right answer when she made some comments that it's just unsustainable. But I can understand that. But the average person probably wants to see in year 5, it's going to cost this much to have both. Understand why you're having, when you have to fund each one equally, when you don't have necessarily the right priorities, is an issue. I mean, those kind of real simple things that the average person, not the highly educated, classic, double income Dow person would understand, but just the basic, hey, this is what, if it was in your home, this is what it would be. And I think the communication would be much more effective, because I think when she said that, it was just 2 or 3 sentences, and I was convinced that's really what it is. So I think there's a lot of hope with that, and I really appreciate the willingness,
to go after those sort of things. I will talk a little bit about the safety and security thing. I went through a safety and security training by Lion Safety Consulting at our St. John's Lutheran School and Church. And boy, was I really blown away by some of the statistics, the things that we think are very effective for safety and security. When you look at the FBI data and stuff, some of that stuff we thought was good, like barricading the doors with special locks to the floor. Statistically, that doesn't help. And there's a lot of money in that sort of thing. So I would actually ask you to hire this Lion Safety Consultant for a day and just kind of go over some of the data, because when you look at what we're going to buy, you may find that this stuff really is not that good of an effect from a statistical basis, but this is. And it may help you really laser focus on what safety and security would be the most effective for us. So I think there's a lot of really good opportunities now to really dive down into the specifics. And again, I really appreciate the detail and the willingness for you guys to really look at these options and really take the hard stance with the community reacting viscerally against one high school. But when you hear that, when the case is made, and I will say, I think, Dan, you do a great job of being very, very effective as being fair and community. So I read your articles and stuff, and I think working with him and the Facebook and stuff with that simplistic message would be very effective. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Anybody else? All right, I will move on to item number 4, study session discussions. Are there any points of clarification or questions from any board members?
Penny, I'd like to just make sure that we address, I'd just like to make sure that we address Joe's concern regarding the agency relationship with the steering committee and whether that exists or not, and that we provide some clarification one way or another.
I don't want to assume, but I think Joe might be referencing the new connections group that we're forming, that Katie will be leading. This was a new entity that we sent out an all call for any community member who is interested in joining. And we have 25 or so, 31 members of our community who volunteered to be part of this. Interestingly, I would liken it a little bit to the steering team. I think we haven't met yet. We had to postpone the first meeting, but on the surface, based on their application materials, a pretty diverse group. Not all who I would put in the bucket of being robust fans of Midland Public Schools. So, we're willing to see how this unfolds. We're looking for this to be a two-way communication engagement, an opportunity for them to share what they're hearing and insights they have, as well as, of course, share information back out into the community. So we'll keep the board informed along the way, and at some point, maybe even have a few of those members join us here at a board meeting.
Great.
Does that answer your question?
Kind of. Yeah, whether that relationship actually exists in terms of the NDAs and the code of conduct and
so at our first meeting, there is an intention to talk about what the parameters of engagement are, so to speak, and develop some working agreements of how we want to function.
Okay.
I don't think our intention was for it to be quite that detailed. It is, of course, a formally connected group, but we weren't looking for them to be MPS soldiers and go out and run a mission.
That's my understanding of it as well.
Yes, and they still are independent citizens who certainly have their own voice and may agree or disagree with anything that's presented at these meetings.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
Perfect. One thing in my head went to when we were discussing, especially if we move forward with just a sinking fund, is how would we assess whether or not we need to make any boundary adjustments given the physical footprint that we have for where students are enrolled?
School enrollment boundary adjustments.
School enrollment boundary adjustments.
Oh, you're just going to go right there, aren't you, Phil? Yeah, I know that should the board choose to accept this recommendation, and these next 18 to 24 months of dialogue and engagement and education with our community part of what also will need to happen is for us to decide and determine what decisions, what do we need to do to be responsible stewards of existing resources. I think it was mentioned, do we need to take some action more urgently on moving grade levels or groups of students to maximize the space that we currently have? I will share, our team has been asked to put together some contingency plans if we do, again, go down this road of a sinking fund, knowing that Carpenter Pre-Primary Center and Northeast both have some concerns. We need to be prepared should we have something more catastrophic happen that might delay students being in the building or cause us to move students in a more permanent way. So we are making those plans, and I think from that, we will realize some opportunities for the things you've discussed. Potential boundary adjustments, potential movement of students. We, of course, will have very detailed and robust discussion here at a board level that will be all very open and public if and when that time comes.
Yeah, I would just ask your team to think about if we have acute issues that need to be addressed now, I don't want to wait 2 years, right? Because it's all about student outcomes.
Agree. Agree. And we're monitoring enrollment closely to know what those are looking like in our elementaries and where we might have space. I'll just share, at this point, we're not magically creating more space in elementaries, and you all know that the ESA, Midland County ESA, continues to ask for more classrooms for programming. So this will just be an ongoing challenge for us in our elementary schools.
And before I turn the floor over to Penny, I'll just share with board members here in the community. Anna and I attended a meeting at the ESA on Friday afternoon on behalf of MPS that was organized by John Searles, the superintendent of the ESA, for the not only MPS and the ESA, but also our other neighboring county schools, to meet with Representative Schutte and Senator Green, specifically on the topic of education funding. Really talked specifically about Section 56, which is special education and how the formulas are determined for Midland County, and then also 31AA and some of the language in the law. But talked about school funding overall. I one of the takeaways I had is just how well our administrative teams across the county work together. It's clear that you guys have all figured out how to be super efficient with our use of tax dollars. I think some of the statistics shared with Representative Schutte and Senator Green, it was amazing how efficiently Midland County, and a large part of this is Midland Public Schools, delivers special education funding or special education to our students. So just want to say thanks to the other districts that attended that, as well as the time from Representative Schutte and Senator Green, as they were, I think, in the middle of negotiating a state budget, which I think passed, or the framework kind of resolved last night. I'll turn it over to you now, Penny.
Yeah, it seems there is a framework, but we don't have many details yet.
Okay. So more to come.
Yes. I just want to make a clarifying statement about what we just talked about. I certainly don't want to mislead the board or the public listening to our meeting. There is no clandestine plan that we have in place for boundary adjustments or to reconfigure schools. We just know through this period of engagement ever since the last bond proposal, we have a responsibility to live within our means. The budget picture is pretty clear to us, and we know that we need to be beginning to prepare to make some hard decisions. And to your point, Phil, that needs to come through the lens of what's best for students and their learning outcomes, as well as what is financially responsible, being stewards of our community's dollars. So we're getting to work on that. And again, as I said before, those will all be conversations that we'll have at the board level if and when we need to make some tough decisions. Recommendations will come to you. My only other comment is to echo your sentiment in thanking the three who joined us today, but also the full steering team. I think if I calculated properly, that group spent 15 hours together, and I want that to just sit with us for a minute. That was 15 hours of learning, dialogue, debate, discussion, emotion, logic, all the things that it took to get that group to a point of consensus. And I loved the stories of how some people drastically changed their minds over time when they could see the facts. I'm ready for that with the community. I think we owe it to them. But we have to entice our community to want to engage in that learning, to your point, Anne, and to show up. And for us to go out and meet them where they are, 15 hours is a lot of time, and replicating that on multiple levels. But I do think we have such opportunity ahead of us to create something really special and important for our students and our community. But I also just want to end by saying I appreciate the steering team's recognition that we need something that the community can rally around together right now and move forward, something that's practical, that very much connects back to the priorities identified in the facility assessment, and that is a win so that we can prove to our community that we are trustworthy, that we say we're going to do these projects. They might not be the most exciting, forward-facing projects, but they're important. We're going to do it. We're going to show you that we've done it. And then we're going to show you again that we've done it and build toward what that beautiful, bright future is for us. I look forward to our conversation at the July board meeting. That is when we will ask you to reach consensus on what this proposal could be. And again, on that August 5th is when you'll formally take action, if and so you choose to. In the meantime, as always, the invitation is open as individual board members. If you have questions, concerns, comments, please reach out to me. I will gather that information, I will share it back, and of course, we will also bring that to the next public board meeting. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thanks, Penny. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion by Horowitz, support by McFarland. All in favor? Aye. Adjourned.
I realized mid-meeting I didn't pick up my kids.